Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with a mix of Neighbors from Hell and malicious compliance stories. If you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our awesome community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, My neighbor took pictures of my grass to email code enforcement. I bought a cute ranch home in the middle of a larger city. It had a nice sized front yard covered in grass when I moved in. I had never had a property with a lawn, so I did my best to keep it up, watered it, mowed frequently, etc. After a few months of me living there, I started getting notifications on my door every single time my lawn got a little too long. I just kind of shrugged off the first few, but then it kept happening and I was still mowing regularly, so I didn't understand why. I finally got a hold of the folks at Code Enforcement and found out I was getting tagged because there was grass that was over 6 inches on the inside of my planter where no one could have really seen it. Okay, fine, so I buy a weed whacker. I kept my lawn in just okay condition, better than most of the neighbors but not as good as some. Months go by and everything is fine, and then again I get another violation for my grass being unkempt. But this time I have no clue why. I just mow again, making sure to hit every damn spot. Then another period of calm and no citations. A few months pass and I had to take my car in to have some work done. I dropped my car off for a couple of days and took to walking to work. On the second day, I look out my window and see my neighbor outside coaxing my grass up. It was a kind that grew kind of long but stayed flat on the ground, with a ruler in one hand and a camera in the other. It was my damn neighbor. He had been taking pictures of my lawn whenever any part of it was standing over 6 inches tall or could be positioned to stand over 6 inches tall. He thought I was gone because my car was not there, so he let himself onto my property to muster up another complaint. So I asked him what he was doing and find out that him and his mom think I am trashy. That is weird for a young single woman to buy a large house and live there alone. They don't like the type of people I have over. Heavily tattooed bikers and Mexicans were the main complaint. They just didn't like me and they thought I brought the caliber of their neighborhood down. They were also doing this to the black dude who lived across the street, but not to anyone else, even though plenty of people had yards that looked like Sanford and Son. We were obviously the problem. Shake my head. So I tore up every shred of grass and made sure it was all dead. The neighbor was furious at the idea of me having a dirt lawn. He stood outside swearing as we dug it all up. I imagine he complained to the city about that too, but dirt lawns are perfectly allowed. I left it like that through the flood season because my neighbor used to let his dogs out front to run in everyone's yard, and when mine would turn into a mud puddle, he either couldn't let his dogs out or would have to bathe them upon them returning home. Then winter came and I dug out the paths and put in planter boxes for my new huge vegetable garden because I found out growing veggies on the front yard was totally legal. They were built less than a foot from the property line. They were huge and made from old railway ties. I think that is what they are called, the big treated wood used for train tracks. We also built a little free library and installed a bench for the kids right next to their property line and stocked it full of children's books. The little free library was such a hit, they moved the bus stop 3 doors down and picked the kids up there because they would all be by the book stand when the bus came anyways. So the bus began to pick up and drop off kids right in front of my neighbor's house every day. Then came spring and we planted huge crops of all kinds of stuff. The planters took up most of my front yard, so there was all kinds of room. I could not find the time to tend to it, so I hired my neighbor's son, a heavily tattooed, like face and hands and everything, Mexican guy who would go over during the day and take care of the plants with his shirt off while playing Mexican music. The neighbor tried calling the police on my gardener a few times, claiming he was violent or breaking in or whatever. And we also made sure to decorate the crops with all kinds of weird stuff that I really loved but that many would consider tacky. Mostly those shiny, wind twirly things and pink flamingos. I also went ahead and hung year-round Christmas lights to illuminate my garden. Then it became time to harvest. There was tons of food, like more food than we could ever eat, so I started putting boxes of veggies out with big free signs on them, and local low-income folks would come grab everything we couldn't use. Of course, those boxes were where? You guessed it right, next to the property line of the neighbor. Those neighbors hated me with a passion by the time I sold that house. The best part is that when I went back to that city a few years after I sold the home, and the vegetable garden is still there, going strong, and the new resident has painted the house bright purple and has a bunch of huge metallic lawn frogs and jumbo metal flowers all over the place. And they put these tower type things in for climbing plants to grow up, and a cover to give some more shade. It looks even more gaudy than when I left. Even better than that, there was a huge rainbow flag mounted by their mailbox, and the old neighbors thought that sort of thing is a sin. To be fair, I didn't really do all that just because of my neighbor. I was planning on putting in a vegetable garden in my backyard, but I had a large fire pit and entertaining area out back, so it would have been a fairly small vegetable garden, or I would have had to sacrifice my hangout space. So having motivation to put it elsewhere was a blessing in disguise. If I hadn't already wanted a vegetable garden, I likely would have just gotten like 300 flamingos and converted my lawn into their sanctuary. And guys, I gotta say, I don't even know which category this story really belongs to. I suppose it's a mix of malicious compliance and petty revenge. However, there couldn't really have been a better outcome for this. Pissing off your neighbors from hell all the while you're also helping other people and getting petty revenge? That is just brilliant if you ask me. In addition, if you have watched until here, I would really appreciate it if you could post a boatload of star emojis in the comments if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance, your help is very much appreciated. And the next one is titled, "My employers wanted me to bill them by the hour, so I billed them by the hour." A bit of a backstory: I have for some years now worked at some local farms as a farm assistant. Because employers gotta pay employee fees to the state, I was hired by a medium-sized company that rents out assistants to farms, so they can rent me without paying the employee fee, which is quite a large percentage of what the employee earns. I later discovered that the company I technically worked for took about 25% of what the farm offers paid them to me. And the only work they are basically doing is doing the taxes for me, so I decided to quit and start my own private company where I rent myself out to them for the same price and same work with a substantially higher income, with the only extra work being that I have to do my own taxes from now on. Or so, that was the idea. The farmers get a set amount of money from the state as aid to hire farm assistants, so they wouldn't be losing money by this. While I still was employed at that company, my employers, just for the sake of doing everything easy, just counted the days I worked at their farm with a fixed hour. Since it was about 2 hours work on each farm, they just sent in the schedule I have worked to my company that I have worked 2 hours a day. So when I started up for myself, things took a turn for the worse because they tried to push me over a bit for their own convenience. I offered a deal to keep things similar and easy as before, where I set a price for a day's work, so even if I end up working longer a day, I won't charge extra, and the yearly amount is the same they pay to the company I used to be hired under, and I still do just as much work. They, however, were not satisfied with that, since they saw an opportunity to exploit this for their own benefit. They wanted me to get paid by the hour and work a day more a week. I reluctantly accepted because they wouldn't budge, and it is worse going without a job. I would still get a decent higher hourly wage than before and still earn the amount a year I would plan to earn by going independent, but instead of the extra work being just the taxes, I also now ended up working more days. In the new contract I wrote with them, it was stated I have to write up the hours by the minute and send them the time I used every day, so the easiness from before has been completely tossed out the window, so their hope is obviously getting more hours out of me on the money they already paid by the state. The amount they get in aid from the state is about 80k each a year. I only get 60k of that from the company I was hired under. This is not money that can go to themselves since the aid is paid after they pay me. Cue the malicious compliance. I started using a stopwatch and noted down the hours by the minute, which turned out to be some minutes more than 2 hours a day. On occasion the farm owners stopped by while I worked and we stood and talked for a bit. Could quickly be 15 to 30 minutes, which was mainly work-related talks, what needed fixing or upgrading, and stuff like that, so I let the clock continue ticking. Also, on regular intervals, I had to clear out the crap, which also took an additional 15 to 20 minutes. Needless to say, they needed to pay me more than the amount they got as aid, and farmers in this country don't really earn much because the expenses such as food for the animals takes away most of the income, so they were not happy about having to pay me close to 10k more a year each, something they would have avoided had they not been greedy and accepted my first deal. They then wanted me to work less days some weeks, which was fine because I started to feel a bit overworked, but they also wanted me to not add the chats in with the work time, which I refused. And apparently they wanted to take me to court over that, but as I've heard from one of their wives, someone I grew up with as a neighbor and also thinks this whole thing is silly, that the lawyer heavily recommended not to take it to civil court since I would most likely win, since work-related chats during work time would be counted as work, so I am no longer seeing them at all by the farm when I am working. I have offered again the deal I proposed in the start, but for some reason they are against it. Would have made everyone's life a lot easier since they pay me the same for the same amount of work anyway. And guys, I'm not even sure if the saying greed goes or comes before a fall even exists, because I only really know pride comes before a fall, but it is definitely correct. The more greedy you get, the more likely you are to fail. And the next one is titled, "You called the SPCA because I don't have a doghouse?" My wife and I moved into our first house before we turned 30, and we did it without borrowing money from family members or a co-signer, something I was especially proud of since I grew up poor. To top it all off, when we bought the house, my wife was still in college going for her master's. And damn guys, these people are doing really well for themselves. Anyway, the house itself was not super expensive. In fact, we got it for a steal, but it was in a highly sought after historical part of town. And although there was no HOA, the entire neighborhood practically competed to keep theirs looking the best. Other than when I was a child in the 60s and 70s, it is the only neighborhood I've ever lived in where I knew almost everyone on the entire street. Since the advent of cable TV, that stuff is pretty rare these days. Our house was on the end of the street and there was a church behind us. My wife's grandmother lived across the street, which was a major blessing, instant babysitter for our daughter, plus we could help look after her in her old age. So we only had one next door neighbor, who I shall refer to as Claudia, a Karen with a pinch of Nazi Gestapo, not in a racist way, but well, you will see. Claudia absolutely hated us with a passion. She was in her early 60s, came from money, and spent the majority of her free time complaining about us. Either to the other neighbors or directly to us, and then the other neighbors. She had to make sure everyone knew what trash we were. It was always some piddling BS like, "Sure, their grass was cut and edged, but not to neighborhood standards." She had appointed herself as the neighborhood's would-be HOA Nazi, except all of her focus was exclusively on us and how we were screwing up. My wife and I had a dog before we moved in, who I shall call Jojo. She was an awesome dog. Half Labrador, half Cocker Spaniel, medium-sized and super smart. I had taught her about 7 or 8 different tricks. During the day, while we are all gone, Jojo stayed out in the backyard. And now the impetus. One day, a rainy day, I come home to find a government notice on our front door from the SPCA, a fairly seriously worded notice that summarized to, "Get a doghouse or else we will take your dog." Since our backyard cannot be seen from the street, I immediately suspect where this was coming from. So I call the SPCA and speak with a really nice young man, and he explains that it did come in from a complaint, but he was not allowed to say who. I tell him I already know who would have complained, but I'm wondering why the notice seemed so harsh. There was real emotion in the way it was written. At first he sticks to the "we cannot say who called" thing, but then breaks down pretty quickly and admits it was Claudia, as well as the fact that he was the one who wrote the notice. Man, she was actually demanding that I take your dog. I wrote it that way just to appease her so I could leave. No kidding, that's screwed up, I thought to myself. Now, here's the thing. Jojo already had a doghouse, a really nice one, that my wife and I paid almost $300 for. I explained to the animal control officer where it was and mentioned that he didn't see it because it is tucked away on the opposite side of the house. But if he goes to the opposite side of our front yard, there is a crack in our fence he can look through to see it. He tells me that is completely unnecessary. He believes me, but he says that he's not so sure that will satisfy our neighbor. Later, my wife says we should just move the doghouse to where Claudia can see it and that will solve our problem. But by this point, my blood was up. This was the last straw. You know, if she wants to call us white trash or gossip to our neighbors, I wouldn't have cared. But you just don't F with a man's dog. It would have been one thing if she called the SPCA out of genuine concern for the dog. I could have forgiven her for that, but we knew she hated the dog too. She had either told us so or, again, complained to neighbors. No, I thought, this is going to call for a different approach. And now onto the compliance. The next day just happened to be Saturday, so my daughter, she was 5 or 6 at the time, and I made a trip to Home Depot. I took my daughter because I wanted her input and had her choose several items. I also asked if they had any wood scraps. And we lucked out. Once back home, I proceeded to build the ugliest doghouse in the world, complete with a day glow green paint that was just slapped on. We then placed it in the corner next to her yard. We shared a fence that wasn't much for blocking the views of each other's yards, plus it was only about 3 feet tall. We heard nothing for about a week and wondered whether or not it even bothered her. Our suspicions were answered one day by one of our neighbors who stopped by to tell us that Claudia had lost her mind completely over the doghouse. She wanted it gone, but it stayed for more than 3 years right in the same spot. Of course, we left Jojo's other doghouse right where it had always been. Jojo didn't use it anyway. She was half Labrador and would literally sleep in the rain. She was a doofus. After credits info. Our battles with Claudia were far from over after this incident. Within a year we found out that she was complaining to the neighbors about my truck, a late 70s Ford with a V8. It wasn't the year or the way it looked, it was the fact that I left every day at about 5:30 AM and our driveway was right under her bedroom. Well, this was an easy fix. Later that week, I had my muffler removed and a straight pipe installed. The state where we lived had no restrictions against it. I also began starting my truck at 5:15 and let it warm up for 15 minutes instead of leaving immediately. Oddly, we heard no more major complaints after that, just the occasional stuff about our yard, etc. After about another 6 months or so, it all came to an end. I came home one drizzly afternoon to find Claudia waiting by our driveway. She was very upset and asking me for my help. Her house was flooding. I had her lead me inside and saw what was happening. I told her I could not fix the problem, she would need a plumber, but I could definitely stop the water. I went outside over to her garage and fetched my water key that hooks up to the valve for the city's water main in front of everyone's house. I then shut her water off right as my wife was pulling in the driveway. Claudia thanked me and I followed my wife inside. "What was that all about?" she asked. I explained and my wife was kind of shocked that she would reach out to me of all people. I thought nothing of it, but shortly thereafter we found out that Claudia had stopped complaining about us. In fact, we never heard a single other complaint ever again. Weirder still, she actually started being nice. She would say, "Hello," in a pleasant, cheerful manner, and from that day forward she was a great neighbor. Fairly quickly, I stopped torturing her with my truck and removed the doghouse. I kept it in the garage for a while, in case it was a trick, but I never needed it again. And yeah guys, I gotta say, that is a very surprising ending to a Neighbor from Hell story. but I suppose some annoying neighbors just turn around like that if you do something nice for them. However, I have definitely also seen examples where one neighbor did something good to the douchebag neighbor, but the douchebag neighbor just continued to be, well, a douchebag. You cannot always fix douchebaggery with kindness, but sometimes it just works, like in the story. And guys, unfortunately, we have already reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, then I would suggest you check out my endless binge watch playlist, which includes hundreds of hours of ripe Reddit content just here on YouTube. In addition, guys, I do have to ask you for a favor. Lately I noticed that many of my new videos don't reach my old subscribers anymore for whatever reason, and so it would be really awesome if you could click the YouTube bell icon just to make sure that all my videos will reach you. This is especially true for people that are subscribed to my channel for longer than a year, because for some reason YouTube doesn't feel like it is necessary to always push out my subscription notices to these people as well. So thank you very much in advance, and I hope you have a great day, and I see you again tomorrow.